Liminal space has always been a thing, even before there was a widely accepted name for it. People, myself included, found ourselves fascinated by this. After all, we are mere humans who cave into curiosity. The idea of a parallel universe or multiple parallel universes is something that has always struck me as absolutely awesome in a sort of starstruck kind of way. Assuming this concept to be even remotely true, there are thousands of versions of me that are both terrifyingly similar and uncomfortably different from one another, and all of those versions of me are very different than myself. There are thousands of versions of you that are both similar and totally different than whoever you currently are. Isn't that fascinating? Liminal space is probably one of the most obscure quote-unquote aesthetics catching the internet's attention right now. After all, scrolling through Pinterest, for example, shows us that liminal space, now sometimes called liminal spacecore, is built up of multiple pieces found from all over. Have you heard of these? Dreamcore, weirdcore, kidcore, nastalgiacore, and traumacore? Good evening, my Jimbos, Jimbobs, and Jimbobinas. I'm Excel Latrina. Welcome to my channel, and let's discuss the liminal space concept and the aesthetics it incorporates. When we think of liminal space, we might automatically think of the backrooms. I won't bore you with explaining what the backrooms are. I mean, let's be honest, by now there are hundreds of videos describing what the backrooms is, what it supposedly looks like, expanding on the lore. Yes, the backrooms is a lore-driven concept, and so much more. There are POV Blender made videos about it, indie games made about it, websites made for it, and plenty of retrospects and icebergs. Every other day, someone or some group of people are further expanding the world of the backrooms by creating new entities to inhabit any particular level and or creating new levels to the essentially endless paradoxical loop that is, well, the backrooms. And that's only some of the many ways people express their interest in the backrooms. What I will tell you about the backrooms that some of us might not have known before, aka me a few months ago, is that it's a creepypasta. Yes, it is a creepypasta in its most original form and was a concept expressed online sometime in 2014, which is a whole 8 years ago from 2022, so frankly, it's an old story. Many of us are simply late to the party. The very first page of Google shows the definition of liminal space given by scienceabc.com, which states, liminal space is a place of transition, a threshold between 2 points, signaling the end of one time or space and the beginning of another. Liminality is, in essence, the word to describe the otherworldly feeling of displacement that everyone has likely experienced at one point or another in their lives. Like that feeling you might have had watching your family leave you after moving all your stuff in, when you see them out of the dorm building and find yourself glancing between your small cramped side of a damn near cubicle and the opposite side where you see the stranger you're going to have to learn to trust enough to eat, sleep, and exist beside for the next 5 months. I experienced this myself when I went to college. I'm from Florida, and even though I should have known better given my extremely reserved personality and lacking social skills, I decided I wanted to go to school in the next state over, which was as far from home as my parents allowed me to be. I was certain that somehow I'd magically make many friends to substitute for the ones I left behind, and figured college would be breezy. Boy, was I wrong. The realization that I was going to be completely alone in a state far removed from everyone and everything I knew with zero connections didn't dawn upon me until returning back to my empty dorm room after watching my parents drive away. My roommate wasn't in there at the time, but her stuff was moved in just as mine was, so she was definitely on campus. I was nervous as hell to meet her too. How different from me was she going to be? Were we going to get along? Will we become friends or tense enemies? It was a polarizing experience, one of the most uncomfortable feelings I'd felt before at that time. This sudden change from what was my normal for the past 18 years of my life was hard to swallow and made me stiff, uncomfortable, and uncertain. This combination that began to brew a kind of dread, I imagine, is an example of what liminality feels like. But how come liminal space has become more associated with physical locations? It's because the same rules apply. Any instance of moving from point A to point B, both mentally or emotionally and physically, brings about the feeling of liminality, though it is easier to directly see what liminal space is, what it is, by looking at the familiar passages that we all take to get around in life every single day. Abandoned homes, airports, hospitals, and any other such building leaves us feeling uncomfortable. When we look at any given hallway, we expect it to be well lit and full of people moving back and forth. After all, we have somewhere to be, and we need to cross through in order to get there. But when this kind of normal we experience every day is disrupted, suddenly and without warning, we become afraid. It's why some people get scared when the lights black out all of a sudden, especially if there's no immediate explanation for why that happened. It's why people are uncomfortable finding themselves walking into a part of the house that's far removed from the party happening a few rooms away. It's why you don't want to walk down an empty street at night by the woods, or feel a need to watch your back in a desolate parking garage. Liminal space as an aesthetic feeds into the discomfort we dread and yet are so familiar with. But this is best achieved by using the elements of its sister aesthetics, primarily dreamcore, weirdcore, and kid or nastalgiacore. I have provided a lengthy list of related aesthetics, yes. But don't worry, I'm not gonna go into excessive detail about them all. I mean, come on now. We've all got stuff to do. I'll be conscious of time and breeze through this to the best of my ability, my little Jimbos. When the knowledge of the precise word is lost, we describe the feelings we get when looking at or experiencing liminality as weird. So say you're walking into your parents' or friend's house, which you were under the impression would be occupied by someone who'd be expecting your visit, someone to greet you at the door. But when you approach the house, you realize no one's there. Okay? So maybe you call them up and ask them something along the lines of, where are they and how come no one seems to be home? But they assure you someone is indeed at home and the door is unlocked for you. Should you enter, you might find yourself fixing to turn your ass around and come back some other day. Others might be feeling a little brave and will search the house for someone or otherwise hang around. At this point, it totally depends on your personality. Regardless, the first few things one might think to themselves in this peculiar situation is, I've got a weird feeling, or something feels weird. It's not just creepy or weird. It feels surreal, unreal, and it makes you feel like you're in some sort of dream. This place is likely familiar to you. After all, you've been here before, but not quite. And thus, the aesthetic all about conveying the feeling of weird comes into play. Weirdcore is rather obscure on its own, and as an aesthetic, it holds hands with dreamcore and traumacore, despite being distinctly different from both of these things. In this aesthetic, the most straightforward display of what weirdcore stands for is the almost psychedelic imagery of eyes. Eyes, and more eyes everywhere. Mushrooms as large as trees and doors as small as shoeboxes. Colors and patterns that don't mix without frustrating the naked eye. Images with so much going on, even with so little direct explanation for what you're seeing to go off of. The weird imagery that you see in the weirdcore aesthetic, yes, can unnerve you, but it brings a sense of comfort, as it simultaneously carries a feeling of familiarity, like you've seen this before in a dream. Dreamcore is very conflated with weirdcore. To an extent, albeit lightly, I already pointed that out. As I said before, it goes hand in hand with weirdcore, but it is entirely different. When thinking of dreamcore, you might find yourself a little lost as far as what to think goes. Just understand this. The goal of dreamcore is to convey the imagery of dreams. That's a challenge in and of itself. After all, most people usually don't remember our dreams. Scientists speculate it may have to do with the way our neurotransmitters work during sleep, particularly when entering the REM stage of sleeping, known as rapid eye movement, which, if you didn't know, is why when you lift someone's eyelid while they're sleeping, the eye is moving around like really quickly. It's weird. Imagine if humans didn't have eyelids and you had to just casually see that. It'd be a mix of hilarious and horrifying all at once. Anywho, other times, it can be safe to say we forget our dreams because the brain doesn't consider those things important to remember. Similarly to the daydreams we experience when we go about our days, entering in and out of that state of auto drive. After all, you probably don't remember every thought that went through your head while you waited in a patient's room for the doctor to come, or what you were thinking as you made yourself breakfast. Still, dreamcore is an aesthetic built around capturing the likeness of dreams, and by that extent, the imagination. All of those things, dreams and the basis of our imagination, is based on, among other things, reality as we remember it. Things we may have experienced somehow in the past, like when we were a kid. Kidcore and nastalgiacore are damn near one and the same. They go together like white on rice. Both of these aesthetics prioritize and emphasize the experiences we had as kids. It's why these aesthetics are usually somehow even brighter than weirdcore or dreamcore. Usually there is a friendlier atmosphere created by these aesthetics, however, it isn't always hunky-dory. When we remember our childhood, we often remember the good times. Getting to go to Disney or some other theme park attraction, going to the movies, or getting a bunch of wonderful gifts on Christmas. But some of us didn't have the most fortunate or well-nurtured upbringing. Traumacore is, well, an aesthetic built around trauma, particularly childhood trauma. It relates to all the other aesthetics I've mentioned thus far because all the same, this aesthetic gives a feeling of discomfort, dread, and fear, but this fear comes from a somewhat different place. In an ideal world, every child will be raised in a community that respects and cares for them, and parents who are emotionally competent and raises said child or children with healthy parental love. But we don't live in an idealistic world, we live in an opportunistic one. And it's sad to say, but there are a lot of people who will take advantage of the opportunity to abuse others. As a means of both venting and coping, people will use the traumacore aesthetic as a pocket community on the web to convey bottled up feelings and unpleasant memories. It is highly recommended, and hell, I'm gonna recommend y'all myself to stay away from these communities. If you're not there to vent and discuss your own CPTSD, or other such traumas, then please be respectful of these communities and just leave it alone. If you have no reason to be there, please don't engage. That said, all of these aesthetics mixed together create the atmosphere of liminal space and liminal space core as we know it. If nothing else, I hope you leave this video with a desire to further explore liminal space before the next best piece of internet horror comes to be. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful night.